Behind me you see the map of the Los Angeles Promise Zone. So just a little bit about how we got to this. So our nonprofit has been around for 30 plus years. I've been there for 24 years. So any of you looking at potential careers, you can go to one place and just stay there ever since I graduated college, which is kind of crazy. But we were originally in DC. We were a think tank, grew out of the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial. I moved YPI out here to Los Angeles in '96. We sort of got rid of the think tank stuff. Not that we love think tanks. And began focusing on direct program services in LA. And so probably going back, and so we do a lot of different things at YPI. We have 1,600 staff. We have 125 program sites across the city. We do everything from running charter schools to running family centers, youth centers, job training centers. We work with youth and adults. The whole spectrum from cradle to college and career is our focus, and really about breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty. So we don't believe that there's any one silver bullet to doing this work. We think you have to do everything across that spectrum, and you have to do it well, and you have to track it over time using data. So those are all key components for us. So that led to us taking a place-based focus to our work in LA, targeting specific communities and really trying to saturate them with resources and programs and staff and different school models and initiatives. And so we were doing that probably 10 years ago in Pacoima, in Hollywood, in Pico Union. And then along came this guy running for president, Senator Obama, in 2007. And this was probably at the point where he's the least likely to win, summer '07. And he said that if I get elected president, I'm going to take the Harlem Children's Zone, which many of you probably know about, Jeff Canada's model, place-based model in Harlem. And I'm going to replicate that in 20 cities across the country. That's going to be the signature poverty component for me as president. Well, lo and behold, he did win. And so Promise Neighborhoods was the first thing that the White House rolled out. This was '09, 2010. And so people all around the country applied to get these Promise Neighborhood planning grants. So it just started as this little thing, you get $500,000 to do some planning. And we were lucky enough to get one of the first 20 planning grants in 2010. And it just coincided so well with our place-based strategy that was already in place. So I think it was sort of a natural fit for us. And actually kind of lucky that the administration took a place-based focus to their poverty work at the same time we had done that here in LA. And so the Promise Neighborhood then led to really a lot of work in Hollywood and Pacoima, which is not on this map, up in the Northeast Valley. Surveying the community, meeting with the community-based organizations, coming together with sort of a comprehensive plan for transforming the community and transforming schools. We have 18 schools in our Promise Neighborhood that we're focused on. That led in beginning of 2013 to a $30 million Promise Neighborhood implementation grant. So that was the first sort of big infusion of White House signature funding through Promise Neighborhood implementation. So $30 million to target Hollywood and Pacoima over a 5-year period, working with those 18 schools. The administration kept evolving their approach, which I think is a great thing to see in the federal government. And so they then rolled out some other signature initiatives around neighborhood revitalization. The first was Choice Neighborhood. So we had Promise Neighborhood. Choice Neighborhoods out of HUD, that's focused on housing. So we now have a Choice Neighborhood planning grant in the Promise Zone. It's kind of got a pink boundary up there in the top left corner. And then they rolled out the Byrne Criminal Justice Innovation grant. So you've got education under Promise Neighborhood, housing under Choice Neighborhood, and then public safety under the Byrne initiative. And so we also then got the Byrne grant, which covers here and up in Pacoima. So at that point in time, we had all three of the White House signature initiatives, only agency in the country that had all three. And then beginning the president's second term as president, he said, let's take everything we learned about our place-based work in the first term, and let's do this thing called Promise Zones as my signature element in the second term. That's taking all the Promise Neighborhood, Choice Neighborhood, Bern, and a lot of other initiatives, and do a comprehensive approach in 20 cities. Again, keeping that 20 locations, not cities, because there are rural, there are tribal, but keeping that focus around integrating all these different federal resources in a place-based way. And so we teamed up with the city of LA with our wonderful mayor, Eric Garcetti, who was fairly new on the job at that time. And we applied to get a promise zone. You had to have one of those 3 grants we already had to even be eligible. So another interesting component of the strategy where they wanted to show you could already do this. You already had all the right people at the table. You already had the data system in place before they would award the promise zone. So there might be areas like Detroit, for example, that had much higher need than we do. But they had not been able to show they had the capacity in place to do the work. And so there's 2 elements of how they chose the locations. So we applied and we targeted basically from Hollywood, basically following the metro line, which is the red, because we wanted to have transit access, over into Thai Town, Little Armenia, down through Koreatown, Filipino town. There's a lot of diversity in the promise zone. And then into Pico Union, Westlake. So almost coming down to the 10, and then going over to MacArthur Park to the east. So very diverse, all sorts of different communities. High poverty, 35% poverty rate. Very dense, the densest part of Los Angeles by far, this whole stretch. With transit running through it, we got 45 schools in the zone that we're working with, mixture of traditional district schools, charter schools, pilot schools, you name it, all sorts of different autonomy models in the zone. And so the way the zone works is unlike Promise Neighborhood, where it's a $30 million grant, pretty straightforward. You run a program for 5 years. The Promise Zone was all about getting no money, even though the papers reported we had $500 million in our pockets, no money, a designation that gives you competitive preference when you apply for federal funds. So rather than the White House trying to get money out of Congress to do this, they said, let's just take the money we already have, another strategic element to this, and make you more competitive when you apply. Because we know you've got the groundwork in place that you're going to take maximum advantage of this funding. We know that your zone is a smart place to invest. And so we've been able to use that preference now. So this got announced January 2014. President announced at the White House. The mayor and I were there. It was all wonderful. And then, so we're now almost 2 years in. And we've been able to use the Promise Zone preference to bring in an additional $137 million in federal funding for this place-based strategy for fighting poverty, 35 different federal grants, 14 different federal agencies that have funded this work. That's another really interesting thing the White House did, is figure out how to get all these federal agencies engaged in supporting work like this, because they all are in their silos. Even within each of those federal departments, you've got silos. But they have done just a phenomenal, best, I think, that there's been in history of getting federal agencies to work together. So 14 agencies are funding the work, and there's a lot of federal resources coming in. And we've got a 10-year designation to deliver on this. So that's my Promise Zone backstory.
Terrific. So we're just going to show some facts. They're going to be kind of looping up behind there. But I thought what I would ask now is, what led you to do this kind of work? So you talked a little bit about how the Youth Policy Institute evolved. But clearly you're leading an organization that is about social innovation, and while you might not have set out to become a social innovator, you have become one. What led you to kind of that career path?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I still haven't quite figured it out. But so I went to Stanford undergrad and got interested in inner city poverty. William Julius Wilson in the underclass was kind of the hot thing at the time. So went out to interview him in Chicago and did, like an honors thing about him. And so I knew I wanted to do something involving poverty. And if you want to do that, at least at that time, you go to DC if you want to do like national stuff. So I went to DC, got lucky. I was hired by David Hackett, who was a close personal friend of Robert Kennedy's. He ran the Robert Kennedy Memorial. He then spun Youth Policy Institute off of the memorial, and he was running that when I got there in 91. So he hired me, and we were doing magazines on youth policy issues, good think tank stuff. But I really just wasn't that excited about the research piece of it. Not that the research isn't absolutely critical, but I wanted to do actual work on the ground. I wanted to see programs in action in communities that we were writing about. So I began sort of developing another arm of YPI, which was doing consulting work. So we would go, for example, to Miami, and we helped them apply for an empowerment zone, which was Clinton's version of what now under Obama is a promise zone. We'd go to different cities and help housing authorities apply for Hope 6 grants, which was the previous version of what Choice Neighborhood is for President Obama. So I got to be involved in sort of these initiatives that were around community transformation. And while I didn't yet sort of have my own theory of how to do this work, I got to see a lot of different models, which I would highly encourage for folks who are interested in this, really just getting out and seeing all the different things going on. Really at the ground level, right, at the grassroots level, how these things can fit together. And we began doing some work around strategic planning with communities, so helping communities determine how to spend money that was coming in. So in Washington, D.C., we worked with the Ellen Wilson neighborhood. They had $3 million coming in for social services, which at the time was a lot of money. That still is a lot of money. And so we helped the residents determine, over a long sort of 18-month process, let the residents determine how that $3 million should be spent. So I also got exposed to this notion of community planning, strategic planning, resident involvement being critical to the work. And so all that stuff sort of came together, and when it was actually when the riots happened, sort of LA, at least for my mind, came to the forefront. And there was this legendary guy named Byrne Criminal. I don't know if any of you know him, but he was an immigrant activist, kind of the urban Cesar Chavez. And he used to come visit my boss because they knew each other from the Robert Kennedy days. And he said, well, you really need to come to LA. You want to do this work, you need to come to LA. And so I came out, and he put me up at his house, introduced me to folks, and then lo and behold, I moved out here in &96. Our founder, so these things you can't control in your own careers, but our founder was retiring, so I got to kind of pick YPI up and move it out here. And then slowly, weaned off the think tank work, slowly stopped doing the national consulting because I just didn't want to spend my time traveling to other people's communities to do this work. I wanted to do it here in LA. And it's a painful process to go into a city like LA with literally zero presence and try to build what was essentially a new nonprofit. And so that's just starting from the ground and just building for the last 15 years. So from basically I was the staff person in LA to now having 1,600 staff is still a little mind-boggling to me, the path that the agency's taken. But it's been about, you have to be good at getting grants, right? You got to be able to get the money. All these theories are wonderful, but you need money to implement them. And so we've always been good at that. You've got to be aggressive about pursuing resources and partnerships and really doing whatever it takes to benefit the community that you're serving. So that's always been our approach. Maybe something's a little bit outside of our comfort zone because we as YPI haven't done it. But if it's going to help the Promise Zone and nobody else is going to go try to get those funds, we're going to do it because the community deserves to have those resources. So it's a little bit of a unique approach. It ends up leaving you with a nonprofit that has a very broad spectrum of different types of services, which is great for someone like me who likes variety, but drives my staff crazy every time we apply for a new grant doing something we haven't done before. Yeah, so that's how I got here.
Well, I think everyone can clearly hear your passion for the community that you're serving. I think that sounds like that is a key driver. Is there some other piece of advice that you might give people who want to do place-based work here in the U.S. or maybe abroad, but in terms of how you keep that focus, or how do you overcome certain hurdles that you've seen?
So the real challenge of place-based work is that you have to be able to bring together a collaborative of folks. Just by definition, you're targeting a community. And so that community's got, a whole spectrum of different needs across, this cradle to college and career pipeline. And so no one nonprofit can do everything for that community. And so you've got to be able to develop the partnerships and the collaborations that are really hard work. Because not everybody in the Promise Zone wants YPI to be the quarterback agency getting the federal grants, right? I mean, it's perfectly understandable. And we do our darndest to try to make sure that other people apply for federal grants, that we support them in applying for grants, because we also don't want it to become just about YPI. But those are the kinds of struggles you run into when you're trying to do authentic collaboration. And we can all do collaboration in name and list the 60 partners, which we did for our application. But the reality is, how do you share funding? How do you blend funding towards common outcomes? And the hardest part in partnerships, how do you share data, right? If you're going to have one data system that every partner's got to put their results into, a lot of things are going to get exposed. And people they've never had to do that before. They don't have the comfort level with knowing that my results are going to be shown to the public, to a larger collaborative. And maybe my results are great here, but they're not so good over here. And I don't want people to know they're not so good over here. I certainly understand that impulse. And so, but then, so that's one side, right? That's getting sort of a community-based collaboration together. Then you've got the public sector. Because again, you can't do this. You can't transform Pico Union if you don't have the city and the county and the school district on board, if you don't have them committing resources, if you don't have them committing to share data. And so those are major obstacles that take a lot of time, but are so critically worthwhile if you're going to do this. Because you can do your little thing, right? Maybe you have your private effort going on, and you've got your 5 partners. But if you're going to develop something you can actually replicate across a city, in other cities, you've got to show the role and how the public sector participates. So we spend a lot of time on our relationships with city, county, school district. We've had phenomenal cross-sector partnerships here in LA that have been models nationally. We got the school district for the first time ever to commit to sharing student-level data with us. So every kid that goes through these initiatives will get individual student-level data on them. Before, all you could ever get was aggregate school data, which allows you to tell a certain story, but doesn't allow you to tell the story of how each kid goes through the pipeline, how each family achieves success or doesn't. Doesn't let you see what works and what doesn't work for an individual family. So those are the kinds of things that, just take relationships and time. And if you want to do this work, you want to get engaged with efforts like that so you can see how that happens. Because it's not, you can't just pick up the phone and call the county and say, hey, we want to partner. And you'll end up dealing with one little silo of 42 silos. So I would encourage anyone who wants to get into place-based to go see what we're doing, go to other cities. There are now 13 promise zones, of which I think 7 are urban, and then you have rural and tribal. And there are now 12 promised neighborhoods. Actually, 4 promised neighborhoods are in California, so you don't have to go too far. There's Chula Vista, Hayward, San Francisco also have promised neighborhoods, but not promised zones. So there are places you can go now and see how this is working in different contexts with different partnerships. In LA, we've gone very big. We have the largest collaborative. We have the most partners. We have the most money. We have the largest sort of geography. I mean, we're basically taking on a little city here. And so you could argue pro or con on whether that's a good strategy. And others are very, very small, very focused, targeting 2 schools, which is great too. So I would make sure you see, different examples of how this is playing out. Another thing about different approaches to the place-based work, what we decided to do here in LA, which we could have gone a different route, right? Rather than just saying we're going to target the area of highest need, right? The place with the greatest poverty. We had a theory that we could link, the map's not there, but you remember it, that we could link places of high poverty with places of high opportunity. And there were some great pieces in the paper that mentioned this approach. But the notion that within one geography you could have both the families that need the jobs and the actual jobs. And you could have a transit line that connects them. And so it's not a stretch to say the families are going to increase their incomes, because 2 stops away on the metro line, there's enormous growth going on in Hollywood. There's skyscrapers, there's all sorts of stuff going on. So you've got economic opportunity paired with high poverty. And so either someone could have looked at it at the federal level and said, well, we don't really want to target a zone somewhere where there's high economic opportunity, because that's not the point of the program. We want to do it where things are sort of bleakest. But the feds didn't look at it that way. They looked at it as, here's a unique experiment in how you can marry the two. And how we can deal with this issue of, because if you think about Hollywood, how do we ensure that residents are benefiting versus residents are getting pushed out. And so that's another key part of our promise zone, which is how do you develop the affordable housing and all the other pieces you need so residents can stay there and benefit from the economic opportunity rather than gentrification.
That's great. Well, that actually sparks a lot of other questions in my mind, but I think we'd be better off now letting our audience ask some questions. And I always like to start with students, so I hope you've been thinking about questions for Dixon. What questions come to mind about this one?
Could you expand more on the challenges of sharing data, data literacy, quality of data, just the data culture that we're in now, and how you've been able to overcome that with the partnerships and sharing the knowledge?
Yeah. And overcoming is probably too strong a word because we still struggle because it's so darn hard. I mean, it's really hard. So we decided to go to a system called Efforts to Outcomes, which is kind of became the default system for promised neighborhoods, so pre-promised zone, for promised neighborhoods around the country. And so Efforts to Outcome allows you to do a lot of things, but the most important thing to us is it allows you to track individuals and families over time. And that's why we needed that school district data to be able to do it. But it requires a lot of capacity at the staff level in partner agencies and in our own agency. And so we've had to beef so we have a research and evaluation department that before we got Promised Neighborhood was probably 3 people, and now it's like 40 people just doing the data part of this. So it's a lot of work, and we're always struggling with the system. Can Efforts to Outcomes do all the things we want it to do? And we're always tweaking the structure of it. And then that's just us trying to do it, right, with a lot of staff to do it. And then you've got a small grassroots CBO, right, who's got nobody in their data. They don't have a data department. And we're asking them to figure out how to give us clean data that can go into this system. And so once you get past the issues of the comfort of doing that, then it's just like technical assistance, right? We just have to go in and support. And so that's part of what our staff does. They work with all these agencies. They work with the city. They work with the school district to figure out how do we make this work. Another exciting thing has happened, and sort of the whole point of doing things like this, right, is we're trying to create a replicable model. And so the city has now adopted Efforts to Outcomes based on the pilot that we've been doing to go across their family source center system. The city has the city's signature poverty program, which actually our mayor started when he was city council president. It's called Family Source Centers. Just a quick tip. So it used to be that the city would take all their anti-poverty dollars and kind of spread them like peanut butter across the 15 council districts, right? You do a lot of $50,000 grants. It keeps all the city council members happy. And so 5 years ago, the city made the difficult political decision of saying we're going to stop doing that because it doesn't have maximum impact. And instead, we're going to take a place-based approach and invest those resources in high concentrations in the areas of greatest poverty. And so that meant we'd put $1 million into a family source center instead of doing $20,000, $50,000 grants all over the place. And so we've been able to use our family source center in Hollywood, which is right in the middle of all this work, as a place to innovate around data. So we got to use Efforts to Outcomes for the data for our family source center system, because the city has not surprisingly, has a god-awful data system. And so we figured if we could show how Efforts to Outcomes can actually work for a city-run contract like Family Source Center. And then we did it on another one, which is a workforce contract with the city. What has happened would happen, which is now the city wants to adopt Efforts to Outcomes across all their Family Source Centers, regardless of whether they're in the Promise Zone or not, which again is the point of this. We want to develop things that can go citywide. So all of that has had enormous challenges and has taken a lot of time. I mean, just to get the school district to agree to share data with us was probably a 2-year conversation, a pretty intensive 2-year conversation to get the comfort leveled up, to deal with all the confidentiality and privacy issues, for them to be comfortable our data system can actually protect all the data they're going to give us. And now, I think it was maybe a month or 2 ago, data showed up on 20,000 students, right, all at once. And so now we're like, what the? And so now we've got to be able to actually process all this stuff coming in, which is, the great news is it's coming in. Now we got to do the hard work of actually putting it to use. So that's why I say we haven't overcome it. There's a lot still to do. But we're seeing movement in the right direction, both for us and sort of regionally, that makes us excited about the opportunity.
Manuel?
I wanted to ask a question kind of where you left off. Of the first 5 promise zones, and I think of the next 8, you're the one facing the most gentrification pressures. I mean, the other ones are like Camden and places where those pressures are quite low. So what sort of specific strategies are you all thinking about? I know that's sort of the top of everybody's mind in LA right now, but with regard to the zone, to trying to make sure that the families that live there do benefit from the economic activity that's taking place.
Yeah. So one of the good things about the Promise Zone is we can be very broad in our strategy because you've got 14 federal agencies supporting it, doing everything from economic development to housing to transportation to healthy fruits and vegetables. We've been able to be expansive in our thinking about it, which again is not to say we've mastered it. But so there's definitely an affordable housing component, which is a struggle for the whole city. But we're trying to figure out all the ways we can use the Promise Zone preference federally, but also a Promise Zone preference locally to accelerate affordable housing within the zone. We have the Choice Neighborhood Planning Grant, so that's the housing grant out of HUD. We'll be applying next year for Choice Neighborhood implementation, which would be another $30 million, which we can leverage into hundreds of millions of dollars to do a scattered site affordable housing around the zone. We've got all sorts of wonderful maps of expiring Section 8 contracts and all the things we need to be preventing in a preventative approach so that folks don't lose their housing. So that's kind of this piece. Then you've got sort of the economic development, small business development, asset building work, which we do some of. We have great partners in the zone do some of that. So that's about creating the opportunities. And again, it's a unique zone because we have a lot of opportunities. We don't have to sort of start from scratch. It's more about connecting to opportunities. So there are jobs, there are opportunities for small businesses to generate revenue, but they don't have the skill set to get the jobs. They don't have the skill set to get the contracts. And so that's where the education and the job training piece is so critical. Because if we can get the skill levels up of our families, again, they've got 2 stops in the metro line and there's a high-paying job, which is the the blessing and the curse of the zone that we picked. So we got to get family incomes up so people can stay. We got to keep the affordable housing and increase it, and we got to do the economic development, business development piece as well. And so those are all evolving strategies. A little bit of the challenge of the zone. The great thing is this competitive preference, right? And I can say $137 million have come in. The bad news is these come as grants, right? And they come at random times, and they come from different departments. And so we end up having to do the piecing together work of how do you blend these funding streams? How do you not spend your time chasing 35 different sets of outcomes, but instead can consolidate on a single set of outcomes across all your efforts? So we're really excited. And this, the mayor announced it, but it hasn't got a whole lot of press. The White House also sees this challenge and came up with something called P3, Performance Pilot Partnerships. And so LA just got one of the first 9 P3 designations in the country, which we're going to use in the Promise Zone. And it allows you to waive federal regulations. It allows you to consolidate outcomes across different federal funding streams. Which is going to be really exciting to see how we can use that tool. And it brings the city, county, and school district are all partners in it. So we'll get to do stuff like actually changing our Promise neighborhood outcomes because we feel like they don't accurately reflect the work we're trying to do in the Promise Zone. Whereas before you get a federal grant, I mean, the world of federal grants, is very restrictive. There's a lot of requirements. There's a lot of reporting. And you never get to change your outcomes. You never get to play with the fundamental. But now we get to do that because of P3. So we have a new sandbox.
So I'm sure there's some concerns sometimes with the administration potentially changing how government grant funding could look like, especially like look at your AmeriCorps programs. I mean, that funding is always under attack.
Yeah.
I doubt that's going anywhere. I doubt the social services block grants are going anywhere. But how do you prepare for potential change in administration? Do you work with foundations? Do you do any private fundraising?
Yeah. So a couple answers. One, we do private fundraising. It's become increasingly important to us because you need that glue money in between all these public grants. You need the flexible money. So our budget's probably 10% private, so we're probably 90-10 public-private. So we want to increase that, but it's never going to increase dramatically because of the size of our budget. So that's one answer. The other piece is that we believe the ultimate sustainability of this model is not about us raising private money, though that's important. It's about showing the public sector here in Los Angeles how they can use their existing money in a smarter, more effective way. Because if you take a neighborhood like the Promise Zone, right now, city, county, school district put tens of millions of dollars every year into that neighborhood, far more than we're putting in through all these grants we got. But it's ineffective, it's in silos, it's not coordinated, there's no common outcomes, there's no common data system. So that's why I keep coming back to this public sector systems change piece, because that's what's going to make it work. When they take their money and they use it in a place-based strategy in an effective way, where they break down the silos and they blend the funding streams, that's when we're really going to get to where we have to get to. And so we feel like this 10 years of Promise Zone is our chance to develop all those pieces so that by the end of this, it is sustainable, even if we didn't get another federal grant. It could be sustainable on what's here locally. And then the other part of that answer I would give is that one, place-based, I think, has longevity beyond this president. In the new Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, No Child Left Behind, looks like it's about to be finally reauthorized after God knows how many years. And so one of the few programs that was kept, a lot of this stuff got consolidated into block grants to the states. One of the few individual programs that was kept was Promise Neighborhoods, which is an Obama program, but the House kept it in the compromise bill. So I think there is a broader belief that place-based is smart, that accountability and data and outcomes, common outcomes is smart. So we were really excited to see that Promise Neighborhoods is in the reauthorization, because that makes it a permanent part of the law as opposed to a particular president's program. And then the last thing I'll say is we're always looking at other ways to do this. So a team of us are doing a ballot measure, a statewide ballot measure in 2016. So it'll be on the ballot next November, which would create a whole variety of things. So it's $7 billion a year for childhood poverty in California. But a chunk of the initiative is 40 promise zones across California. So creating a state-level promise zone with a similar model that those zones, once designated, will get competitive preference when they apply for state funding streams. And a lot of communities that have tried to get these federal designations in California, I think there's now like 80 communities in California that have applied for one of these things. And they're never going to get them because the feds don't have that many to give out. Now they have the opportunity to actually become a promise zone, get designated by the state, and get some resources. So, so we just keep looking for every angle we can find.
So you mentioned that you're the largest ever. And so to me, that means that you're right at the crosshairs of everything that's going on, that everybody has you in their sights. And so how do you manage that level of scrutiny, that level of visibility, and also recognizing that so many people or so many communities are looking for you to be successful so that they can adopt some of those ideas? How do you handle it day to day?
So I'll speak for myself and not my staff, though I think they'd agree with it. We use it as inspiration. We use it as everyone's eyes are on us, so we need to deliver. We need to show that this can work. Because we've spent, you all know this, we've spent over 50 years with different models and approaches for trying to get at this fundamental thing. And as the mayor said at a recent thing we did for AmeriCorps, we need to break the back of poverty. That's the first time I heard that one, break the back of poverty. But we need to. We got to figure it out. So it really drives us. I think it drives us towards accountability. We know we need to show results because eyes are on us. We can't just get away with stories and anecdotes and make people feel good. We got to show that numbers are changing. And so it's a lot of pressure, but I think it's good. At least for our effort, I think it's good.
Could you identify 3 to 5 measures of success that you're tracking and any signs of progress over the years you've been at this in LA?
So when we look at this cradle to college and career pipeline, we sort of hit certain key points. So the ones we've chosen to focus on are prepared for kindergarten. So that's showing how the 0 to 5 piece is working or not working. Are kids prepared for kindergarten? Then proficiency levels in the K-12 system. We look particularly at 3rd grade proficiency, but proficiency in general we're always looking at in K-12. We look at high school graduation, but not just graduation from high school, but graduating college ready from high school. So that's sort of a separate indicator, though high school graduation is still important. And then we look at enrollment and retention into post-secondary. It doesn't have to be college, could be any of a variety of different things post-secondary, but that folks are continuing on past high school graduation and that we're able to support them to stay, whatever they end up getting involved in. I feel like those, and then obviously we're always looking at poverty rate, family income going up. What was the second part of your question? So the things? Progress. So the ones we've seen, so it's all still a little bit new, but which is always the excuse. But the ones we're really excited about are high school graduation, college ready. Actually, 2 things. We saw, you probably all know we had this period where we had no state test scores. So that screwed us up a little bit because we couldn't track our schools. But right before that ended, so when Promise Neighbor was in its early stages, we saw a big jump in our API. API is gone now, but big jump in API across our Promise Neighborhood schools. So that's the 18 schools. So that was encouraging, and then test scores disappeared. Now what we've seen more recently is this increase in high school graduation, college ready. And so we had a 63% jump across our high schools in that rate at a time when the district and the state were flat. So that was really exciting because that kind of shows a cumulative impact of the work. Then there have been other good stuff, but that's probably like the best one right now that we can brag about. And so we've actually doubled down on college and career readiness because we see that it's working. So we just got the AmeriCorps program. We just got 141 full-time AmeriCorps members. They're coming like an army into the Promise Zone, and so a big chunk of them are focusing on college and career readiness, and then the rest are all doing tutoring in our schools.
Is that City Year or is that?
No, it's our own. We love City Year; they're a good partner, but no, these are our own YPI AmeriCorps members.
Yeah, when you first moved to LA with YPI, how were you able to convince local community organizations to join the collaborative? And now that you've grown so much, how do you decide how to disperse this huge amount of money so that those partners still stay engaged and are able to continue their work?
Yeah, those are both really good questions. So the first one, when I first came here, it just took a long time, and I was about to give up because it was just too hard, you know. And there's other things you can do in LA besides try to get nonprofits to work together. So go to law school. So just perseverance, and I think being able to tell a story. So this is why it was so critical. I had seen these other things. I had seen Miami doing their empowerment zone. I had seen other cities doing their Hope 6, which is to transform public housing. And so I could talk about these models that I had been part of or helped develop that I wanted to bring to LA. So I could go to the housing authority and say, oh, here's what we did in Cincinnati. You could do it here. But it wasn't that simple, right? They didn't go, oh, yeah, great, you came to us, thank you. So it just took time. And then eventually what it took was proving we could deliver resources. Because again, you can talk all you want. But if you can't show that you can bring dollars to do the work, it doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. And so we had to show that we could, and so we did. We got a big federal welfare to work grant, which was Clinton's thing back in 99, 2000. Brought that to LA, brought computer labs to LA through some federal funding. And so then people begin to see, all right, there's actually something here. And there's a reason to partner because maybe this ability to generate resources is going to benefit all of us. And so then that brings you to the flip side, right, is now when there's lots of resources, we've had to be really tough on our partnership. When we started Promise Neighborhood, I think we were, so Promise Neighborhood before the zone, we were funding 35 other nonprofits. We were giving them like 20% of the grant would go to these 35 nonprofits. And they just honestly weren't delivering the results we needed. This comes back to the pressure. We don't have time to muck around and wait and hope. So we've dramatically cut, at least for Promise Neighborhood, from 35 to I think 20 this year. And so that's just painful stuff, right? People lose the grant that they got, and kind of like when the city got rid of those $50,000 contracts and put all the money in one place. I mean, but you got to do it if you're going to get results. And so we've just had to work those relationships and provide whatever support. We're always willing to do technical assistance and help people apply for grants to the limits, of our capacity. So anything we can do to help. But fundamentally, we can only put our money where we know we're going to get results.
Could you talk about the partnerships with school districts? Like what kind of challenges you come across when you try to establish some programs or try to increase the open space, trying to establish this shared partnerships with schools to increase open space?
Yeah, so generally school districts are hard to work with. And if you talk to most other Promise neighborhoods in the country, their worst problem is their school district in terms of trying to do their work. We've been lucky in that we have school board members who represent the neighborhood and zone who've really been supportive of this approach. So Steve Zimmer, who represents Hollywood and school board president, actually his office is co-located in our Family Source Center, which was the first time anyone had done that. And he brought school district counselors to be housed in our Family Center full-time. These counselors who otherwise normally would have gone to a school site, our center became their full-time base of operations, which meant things like when a family comes in the door to the Family Center, we don't have to, if they've got a school-related issue, which everybody has a school-related issue, we don't have to say, go back to your school and try to find your counselor. And we can say, we'll walk you down the hall to our school district person who can pull up your student's entire record and figure out whatever challenges you have. So that kind of stuff is another example of things that then spread. So now other city Family Source Centers are required to have these school district counselors. Other youth centers in the city are required to have these school district counselors because it just works so well and it's so common sense. But you've got to have leadership. That would never have happened if Steve Zimmer didn't believe in the Family Center, want to physically be there himself more than I'm there, honestly, and bring school district resources to that place. So you got to have leadership. You got to have a commitment to doing it long term. It can't be a fad from one superintendent to the other, which is an issue we'll coming up soon here in LA. But it will not be a fad. And then on the open space piece, that leads to, because we're trying to do this, we're trying to convert playgrounds to parks, because this is a very park poor part of Los Angeles. People have to walk a long way to get to a park. And so we've been trying to figure out how you can take a schoolyard that's not used after school on the weekend and it can become a park. And it's a lot of legal stuff. It's a lot of MOUs and insurance issues. And so we're working through that. And I think there's some research going on about.
Maybe even the person that asked the question.
Is doing that research.
Yes.
But I think on that issue, I can tell you there is a fundamental commitment at the school district leadership to do this. Now, that may not have filtered down to the general counsel's office. So that's part of our job, to make sure that these messages filter down. But anything we can do to support you on that particular thing, we're happy to do, because it's really critical that we figure out how to do it.
Heather?
I'm wondering, it sounds like you're creating a lot of wonderful opportunities, but traditionally in lower income regions, there's a lot of crime, and a lot of it's from people not having opportunities to get jobs, and as you were saying, it's about educating people to get higher salaries. But until that happens, what do you guys do with respect to crime and safety and even education in that area?
Yeah, so we were lucky. We got one of these White House signature initiatives around public safety called Byrne Public Safety Innovation. And so we've been able to use that grant to develop a really nice partnership with the police department and the city attorney's office. And also the city's GRID office, the gang reduction office, have all come together in both Hollywood and Pacoima around a bunch of public safety strategies that we're able to fund, which is what the city's looking for, right? Because they can't fund it. So we've been able to use Byrne to develop stuff that we can then use for the Promise Zone as a whole, so and find additional resources to do. And another piece of that is that it's kind of going back to the root cause of a lot of the public safety issues, which is our disconnected youth population in Los Angeles, which is just enormous. And so we've put a lot of money and time, and the city's been a great partner, and the Center School District, around disconnected youth. So we have multiple centers, 3 centers just within the Promise Zone, Promise neighborhood, focused entirely on disconnected youth. So we measure it, some of it's determined by what your funding source is, so some federal things require certain measurements, but fundamentally post-secondary attainment or employment or post-secondary attainment. So these are youth who have dropped out of school and don't have employment, and they're older youth, so sort of 16 to 24. So the folks with the least prospects in life, and the stories that these kids tell are the most heartbreaking stories you will hear. I mean, that if you want to experience life, go to one of these youth centers and hear these stories, because they're just, every year at our gala that we have one of these youth speak, and it's just always the highlight of the night, because people are crying. Yeah, so we've been really putting a lot of effort into how can we support bringing those youth back in. You've got all sorts of issues around even being comfortable being in a place and working with people and not taking off, and then skills attainment leading to some kind of post-secondary or employment. So we have a big summer jobs program that we run. We do about 700 jobs for summer youth every year, where we pay the wages, we place the youth at an employer, and so that targets our disconnected youth. So we're hoping through some combination of what we do with LAPD, city attorney, and what we do to sort of further down the pipeline to stop the problem in the first place, that's gonna work. But this is gonna take time to know.
Has there been a reduction in crime?
We're actually trying to measure it right now, because I was really curious about that, because we've been hearing all this stuff about crime going up in certain parts of LA recently. We haven't been hearing that in the Promise Zone. But that's right, that's the worst kind of data, right? I haven't been hearing it. So we're gonna try to figure out if what's going on. So we're working with LAPD to pull that data together.
Maybe one more question? Two. One a student and a faculty. So we'll go to the back so you haven't asked a question.
Hi, my name is Dr. Armand with the Center for the Study of Social Policy. I had a question about, just talk about kind of the crime and safety sector. How about like health, as well as like early care and early education sectors? I know there's a few place-based efforts, but just overall, how are you coordinating with those efforts?
Yeah, so those are really important. So I mentioned one of our key indicators is readiness for kindergarten. We're not going to have readiness for kindergarten without a vibrant 0 to 5 early ed. So we helped the county get a big early Head Start contract, which is bringing a bunch of early Head. We're actually opening 3 new early Head Start facilities in the next couple of months in the zone. So those are the really young kids. And then we've been providing technical support to existing child care providers, preschools, to try to make sure folks are using common assessments, because a lot of the assessment issue is a big problem. So it's a combination of support, opening new centers, that's kind of the 0 to 5 piece. And then on the health part, I don't think we've gotten a grant that was specific to health. Well, we've gotten some stuff around food, fruits and vegetables, corner store and conversions. But we've teamed up with St. John's, which is actually based in South LA, and they've got a mobile health clinic now that goes around the zone. Some of our school campuses are getting either received or are about to get wellness centers, basically a school-based health clinic on site. So it's not something we as YPI do. We don't deliver health services, but we try to find those partnerships.
Dave?
It's a relatively small area, 165,000 for LA, and yet it's a very diverse area. And so I wonder about your statistics when you give them for the whole thing. If you go up into the east and East Hollywood, it seems like a very different place than West Hollywood. And as you come down into Koreatown and others. And I was wondering how much you break up the zone when you think about, say, crime, or you think about affordable housing, or you think about your successes with the education.
Yeah.
Because I worry that in some sense, as you elevate it up, some things that could be happening in Hollywood might be masking, forgive the word, failures in other places, and allowing things to disappear in a way that's very typical of LA, unfortunately.
Yeah.
As we go up, we look a lot better.
Yeah. So that's a big priority for us, because we know that's going to be the criticism of this zone in particular, which is that, oh, you got things better, but you got better because of. And in fact, we're just talking about how we're seeing this. We have to confirm it, but we're seeing this drop in poverty in the zone, and we need to figure out: is that us? Is that the great work going on, or is that gentrification? Right. So, I would say that. There's no perfect answer to it. Everything we do now is mapped with all these sort of hot spot. I mean, whether it's crime we're looking at or housing we're looking at, we've got all these maps and hot spots and figuring out where. And so in that sense, we break it down. You know, we're very sort of locally focused on. So like our Choice Neighborhood Grant, which is the housing one, is very focused on a particular part of the zone, which actually happens to be the Hollywood part, which is interesting. And this is just something that has surprised us throughout. I said the zone is 35% poverty rate, where the Choice neighborhood is, up in Hollywood, 36% poverty. Higher than the zone as a whole, which is really, really striking. But in any case, and so the Choice neighborhood is taking a particular local strategy there. The crime grant's got another chunk of the zone. The Promised Neighborhood education piece has a different chunk where the schools are. So some of it gets chunked just because of grant necessity, that just the grant forces us to chunk it a certain way. But a lot of it is because we're trying to use data and hotspots to figure out where to target our resources. But in the end, this story of whether we go up or down is going to come back to the data. And that's why we've got to be able to tell these family stories. We've got to show how families have improved. Because one, that means that we know that they stayed. And two, that their income went up or their educational achievement went up. And so we can do that now with the student level data, with our data system. And so if someone tries to argue, well, it just went up because Hollywood went up, we can say, well, look at these 5,000 families whose income went up by this much because they participated in Promised Zone services. And so that's going to have to be part of our answer. And hopefully it's true that poverty did go down. And even better if we can show some of it is the work we're doing. But it's always going to be a complicated